10th offer, but it'll happen. So, okay, that took a little bit longer than planned. I'm sorry, Pamela. Thank you for being patient. Pamela's here. She's going to share with us about leases. So take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Hi, guys. Has anybody have you done a lease yet? Or kind of tell me, I just want to kind of get a gauge of who's done a lease so far. Okay. A lot of people are a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as I'm talking, if that's okay. Can I do that, Zareen? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
A lot of people are a little bit, they shy away from leases because they think, they are work, no doubt about it. But it's interesting, even right now, I think they're becoming even more relevant and important because we can't find places for people to buy. And so now we kind of put us in the position of having to find them a place to lease. And so it's definitely become a bigger part of what we're doing right now. And so really want to encourage you guys to become comfortable with it and kind of the process of it. And I know it doesn't give as big a payout, but if you stay in touch with that tenant, it will create a buyer eventually. Just remember that it will create a buyer eventually. I had a conversation with an agent yesterday about that. And, she said, you've been in there a year and now they're ready, to find something. And they didn't buy a year ago because they couldn't find anything, right? And now it's coming up for renewal. And so she's staying with them. Do you want to renew? You want to buy? So definitely it should be part of your business plan of working with rentals. It's just working with the rentals, you have to remember to stay in touch with them and to keep giving them, information about the market and things like that. This class is really coming from a perspective of you're presenting a lease, not necessarily doing filling out a residential lease listing. A residential lease listing is very similar to a regular listing. It's just a lease instead, has a little bit few different terms, but there is, a form for that as well. And when I finish the class, I will actually send out a list of all the forms that you could possibly use and some forms that we talked about today. So I feel like you have to scramble and write them all down because it will definitely, I'll send them out for you. All right, so let's get started. Hopefully you can see my screen as I fumble through trying to see all my ninja mastery there. Let's see here. Where did it go? I just had it up. Maybe I just need to minimize. That's probably what I need to do. Of course not. Of course, I'm sitting here just working on it, playing on it, and all of a sudden, it's not here. Hold on one second. Sorry about that, guys.
No worries. This is the miracle of technology, right? I always do that, and I have like my two screens, and I have a Mac, and you can do like the finger swipe and see every window that you have open. So then I'm always like, what can I close here to make this less of like an obstacle course?
I know. Especially, and I'm working on a new Mac. And so you save things very differently on a Mac than you do.
Yes.
It's very different. And so anyway, let me see if I can.
Do any of you guys that are on here right now have specific questions about leases? Blake, I know you're right in the middle of one. Do you have anyone have specific questions we can make sure we're going to get to?
I'm right in the middle of one where we're putting one on the market on Monday. I guess just kind of educating my landlord, because it's their first time leasing as well, or being the landlord, kind of walking the agreement to when like the applicants come in and filling out the whole lease agreement with the tenant, just to make sure I cover all my bases for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts when you're listing, and it's almost as much work as a sale. Not always, but it is a lot of just things to know. So, all right, Pamela, it looks good. We see what is a lease and what are the terms of a lease.
Okay, great. So there's the language is a little different, in leases, term of tenancy, in limits of occupancy, things of that nature. The landlord can be very, very specific in what they will allow and what they won't. And so it's really important, to go through for example, if there's a limit of how many people in the home or no pets and things like that, They can be very, very specific on what's allowed and what's not. And these are some of the things here that they can actually mandate whether or not, the limits of occupancy and the pets and, and how you give notice to vacate. And we'll kind of go through those different terms as we go through the class here. What is the term of tenancy? Well, it's just what does a lease create? It basically creates a tenancy that can terminate after a specific term, and it's usually a year. Now, that does not really apply to, a term of tenancy can be either a short-term lease of a buyer or a short-term lease of a seller, which we're also including in our, as part of our daily processes here, because things are moving so quickly and we're seeing a whole lot more buyer temporary leases and seller temporary leases. Usually the only one for a year is just a regular lease. It's not a temporary lease. And so, but those are also becoming, and those are actually separate forms that you would attach and that goes along, with the sale of the home whenever you're doing a temporary one as well. Down, over. All right, what happened here? This is not good. It's blinking at me. There we go. There we go.
Share just stopped. There you go. Oh,
okay. So limits of occupancy. So your agreement should clearly specify the rental unit.
Pamela, I think your share stopped.
Uh-oh. Well, I'm sure it's not user error. I'm sure it's the internet. Sure. Let me do that. Let me go back to share. There we go. All right.
There we go.
Am I back? Okay. Very strange. Okay.
Yeah. We see you probably need to put in presenter view.
Okay. Let me get it to the right screen. So we're going to talk about limits of occupancy, which they can be very specific depending on what area you're in. If it's a 1 to 4 family kind of regular neighborhood, they're not as limiting, but they can, depending on, for example, if it's in a college area, they can limit how many unrelated adults can live in the home and things of that nature. So they can get very, very specific. So be sure that you do understand what the landlord's wanting if you're representing them and doing this, or what the actual lease listing says in terms of how many people can live there. Minor children, as well. And so all the names of the tenants really all need to be on the lease, whether or not they're married, whether or not they're not, but all adults living in the home need to be named on the lease for sure. That way, if one of the adults leaves the home, it honestly does make the other adults in the home responsible for the lease. And so everybody that is an adult over 18 that's living in the home, they need to be named on the lease. Rent or payment methods that can also be mandated of how they want the rent or the payment method. I think it's moving towards electronic. I think that a lot of people are either doing direct deposits through a system that they've already set up electronically, or Venmo or Zeal, because they get it right away. They don't have to wait for a check to clear. We're seeing that more often in that they're not really accepting personal checks as readily as they will accept it in electronic payment. So whomever is doing the lease, they need to be prepared to do that. And if not, those checks will have to be, they'll probably give you the check to give to the tenant. So you have to make sure that those are all delivered. And so, and there will also, in the lease, it will also talk about whether or not late fees will apply. And typically they do after the 3rd or 5th day. I know that Zareen, you do a lot of leases. How many days do you give before you do a late charge?
I put 3 in the lease, but when I'm setting it up in my payment system, I wait till the 5th day because I'm a sucker.
Right. So typically it's 3 to 5 days in knowing that. So, and then, the lease will also mandate, how much that will be. Sometimes it's a $25 fee. Sometimes it's $100. It depends on the amount of the lease. It kind of depends on, where it is, but definitely know that they have the right to charge late fees if it's late. And if a check bounces, which, none of us have ever done that before, but if a check does bounce, there can be a charge for that as well. Typically it's $25, $30, whatever the bank charges. Security deposits. This is probably one of the hardest things to deal with for leases in terms of, a lot of times when tenants give a deposit, they just think in their mind they're going to get it back regardless. And you really need to prepare them that anytime you give a security deposit, please plan on not getting all of it back, even though you may be the cleanest person ever and you've taken really good care of it. It seems like, the carpet will always need to be cleaned, things of that nature. And so they will take that out of the security deposit, and just kind of prepare them for that. Because a lot of them are very disappointed when they don't get that back.
I also just put into the lease what my cleaning expectations are and say that if receipts aren't provided, then that's automatically going to happen, just so that they can't even argue with you about it.
Right. And the dollar amount it'll be specified, the security deposit will be specified in there. A lot of people ask how much how much a security deposit is. A lot of times it equals the first month's rent is typically what it will be. Do you see anything different, Zareen, really? Because that's typically what I see. Oh, she may be on mute right now because the doggy. But security deposits are typically equal to the first month's rent. And so, but again, there's no rhyme or rule to it. That's just kind of the norm of what we see. And again, how the deposit can be made. Again, it's move this over so I can read it. The deposit can be used for damages or, like I said, cleaning carpets. And it seems like they always find a way to, make some deductions to do just normal cleaning and repairs when people move out. And when and how it will be returned. The leases can get very specific in there to talk about, when it can be returned. A regular truck lease doesn't really have a place in there that says they have to return it by 10 days, 15 days. But so you may want to look at that and add that language in if it doesn't provide a place to put it. There's all different kinds of leases. And, because sometimes you're going to deal with a management company. Sometimes you're going to deal with a nice condo apartment complex. So there's so many different kinds of leases, but you just need to remember to look for the most important terms and make sure that you're helping your client cover their bases. Does anybody have any questions at this point? I know this is just, leases are so exciting. I know. Okay. Insurance requirement. This is really important. We just had a class on this yesterday or day before about how important it is to remind your clients that that they need to get an insurance policy, a rental insurance policy for their belongings in the home. It typically is always required, but that is on the tenant to go and pick up insurance, on their belongings. So many people do not do this, and they're like, whatever, but they really need to obtain that lease insurance for their personal belongings, and then also provide a copy of that to the landlord as well. Okay. Entry to rental property. Sometimes this can get a little sticky to avoid tenant claims of illegal entry or violation of privacy rights, the lease should clarify the legal rights of access to the property. For example, to make repairs. It depends in the lease, it'll say, we'll give you, if they need to come in and do maintenance or general things of that nature, they'll say, we'll give you 24 hours notice to come in and be able to do general maintenance. Maybe they need to come change out the filters, things like that. So they do need to give them notice. There needs to be a time frame in there. Typically it's 24 hours. Now, if it's an immediate repair, maybe you have a water leak, maybe you have something's not working, that really just needs to be communicated. But you do have to allow for the landlord to come in within reason to be able to make repairs. And so they do have the right to do that with notice. Who's responsible for what? And so the tenant's responsibility is to keep the rental premises clean and sanitary and to pay for any damage caused by his or her abuse or neglect. We'll talk about pets in a minute, but I would say that's probably the most, we see that often, that the pets will cause the damage, especially to door frames and things like that, or window seals. And so, just know that will be a tenant responsibility, or it will be taken out of the pet deposit if there is damage. The requirement that the tenant alert the owner or property manager of any defective or dangerous conditions in their rental property. It is on the tenant to report any damage. And so if they've seen any leakage, maybe or they've seen mold, they've seen anything at all, it is on the tenant to report that. And so make sure that they know that it's really important that they do. They can't let it just go on and on, because that's showing negligence as a tenant. Pets. And so you have to be sure to impress upon them how important it is to get to that. First of all, it allows pets, and that you do have a pet agreement with the landlord. Like, so many people move their pets in and they think they're not going to find out. And that's not the case. They always do. And so, if anybody ever asks you, you think I really need to do that? Yes, you have to let the landlord know that you have whatever kind of pet it is that you would like to be living with you in your home, because they can limit that as well. And that should be very clearly defined, in the lease listing. Let's talk about defaults of tenant or landlord. A default by owner occurs when there is a failure to fix a problem on the property, which affects the health and safety of the tenant within a reasonable time or time allotted for in the lease agreement. And I see Angela on here as well, and I may ask her, because this can probably become the most litigious aspect of a lease, is if a landlord is not providing a safe and a healthy environment in terms of, repairs that they need to fix or things like that. For example, if you have reported especially a water leak and things like that for, from 1 week to 30 days, that becomes a health problem. And with notice, you can let them know that you're going to move out due to health problems and possible safety problems. Now, it could come down to a litigation, whether or not, if they really want to go there, of whether or not you had the right to move out. Angela, have you seen any of this?
During, like you said, like during the ice storms last year, there's some of that. And then sometimes, like, if there's just a real jerky landlord, and it's July and they just won't get the HVAC fixed. So, it is a hassle and everything, but it is a right that the tenant has, but they got to go through a lot of steps.
Right.
Yes. And I will say that the promulgated lease form that we use is very, very landlord friendly. And I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but it has to get pretty bad for a property to be uninhabitable. Like, I don't think tenants have the right to hot water and things like that. So Texas is pretty landlord friendly.
It very, very much. It says it has to affect the health and the safety of the tenant within a reasonable time or allotted time in the lease. And so, who gets to determine that? I'm not sure, but but definitely, for example, when she said, if the AC is not working, obviously you can't live there, but so you may have to, make other arrangement for a couple of days. But if they don't fix it for 30 days, well, and it's in the middle of the summer, that is a safety or health problem, because you're going to sit in a hot box and sweat, and it's not going to be a good situation, especially for elderly or younger children, or anything like that. So just know that they do have the right, if it will affect their health or safety after a certain period of time.
Hi, Pamela. And so,
yes.
I just one of my friends met the issue, something like that. And so, she just helped her friend, and the friend just rent a house to the couple, and the couple was pregnant. And so, but the couple finds the renting house and has a mold issue. And so, do you think this will be the cost legitimate issue, or how to deal with that?
Sure. They need to get proof. They need to have maybe somebody come out and inspect it, or or ask that the landlord have it inspected, take pictures. If it's visible mold, then it's been there for a while. And so, because mold, grows from the, typically the inside out in homes. And so, take pictures and possibly get it inspected, or encourage the landlord to get it inspected. And then, you can give notice upon, this is definitely something that will affect my health, the health of my child and us, as well. And I would say that would be a reasonable right to vacate or give notice to vacate. But, again, it's going to come down to the determination, whenever it goes to arbitration, whether or not they, you actually will be liable for the rest of the lease. But in case of mold, and especially visible mold, I'm not, I'm not an attorney, and I'll let our two attorneys on here speak to that, but it's going to come down to the decision of the litigators, of the arbitration, whoever's doing the arbitration. Angela, have anything to add to that?
So kind of the mold is just kind of the under, just behind the water pile, just kind of the somewhere like that. It's very invisible places, but you can still see the maybe a little bit mold just kind of in that very hiding areas, and so it still will cause the issue, right?
It's Lulu, it's really, really hard for us as agents to advocate for our clients in situations like this because they're very fact specific cases. So okay. I hate to tell our clients this because we want to help them in every way we can, but usually they need an attorney that really, really knows the law and their specific fact pattern, because we're not attorneys and we don't know the law. So unfortunately, we can help them to a point, but at some point you kind of have to pass them off to an expert who can represent them. And I think if you Google it, there's a lot of like tenant rights organizations that they could possibly reach out to for help, but it's outside of the scope of what we can do since we're not attorneys.
Right. Okay, it just means based on this situation, we just said kind of it out our kind of the scope, and so maybe some expert, maybe the attorney, yes, and help to figure out this situation.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. Let me go back to, let me see how I go back. The notice to vacate. So there does have to be a notice time to vacate in a lease. It's typically 30 days before the lease is set to expire. And so please help make them understand that if they do not give this notice, whatever it says to the 30 days or whatever that is, most of the leases automatically renew. And so be sure that they understand that they're, and honestly, I would put that on my calendar as a flow type thing for a leaser, that you need to remind them whenever they're maybe 45 days out or 60 days out, hey, be sure that if you're going to move out, that you need to give your notice. And that's another way that you can provide value to a tenant that you've helped, as well, to keep them in your flow, right? So that's a really, really good thing to do. There are other restrictions that they can apply. Any other legal restrictions, such as limits on the type of businesses a tenant may run out of the home, should also be spelled out in the lease or rental agreement. Important rules and regulations covering parking and use of common areas should be specifically mentioned in the lease or rental agreement as well. It can also be this specific in terms of, if you know that your tenant is going to operate a home business, you need to look in the lease and see in the lease listing and see if that's allowed. And you need to let the landlord know, this tenant's going to be running the business out of the home, and make sure that there's not a restriction. Because sometimes there's neighborhood restrictions. Sometimes there's HOA restrictions. So it really goes a little deeper than just kind of what the landlord is mandating. They're also having to go by whatever HOA laws or things like that that's mandated on the particular property. And it's also, that will also mandate the covered parking or regulations of street parking, how many cars can be parked in the driveway. You can actually determine they can only have 2 cars in the driveway. So it can get extremely specific. So if you've got a family that has 3 teenagers, you want to pay close attention to how many parking spaces are allowed or vehicles are allowed in the driveway or upon the street parking. I know it sounds kind of, it's really not that important, but it really is, because it becomes a nuisance to the neighbors if there is a restriction against it. All right. And I should look at the lease in a minute, but one thing I want to make very, very clear is on leases, how to get paid when you're representing a tenant. And so you will need to provide your brokerage W-9 to the leasing management company, the landlord, whomever it is. You need to provide that to them. They will in turn pay the complete commission to Briggs, BFSIR, and then they will turn around and cut your portion of whatever your split is. And so leases are never paid directly to the agent. Leases always go in of the whole, in whatever the commissions are, it is the whole amount will always go to the brokerage, and the brokerage will then cut you a check. But they can't cut you a check cut the brokerage a check without the W-9. And you can reach out to your sales manager and just say, if you don't have it, can you please send me the W-9 so I can get this lease in place? And so don't forget to do that. It's really important because you won't get paid without it. And so, I was just going to ask a quick question. So if you have represented leases, have you run into any problems at all? Maybe your tenants called you after they were 2 months in and they're unhappy or anything like that. Have any of you run into any problems? Well, that's good.
I guess my only problem I had was I had some tenants come in from California, and we're a heavy landlord state, of course, and they were just kind of worried about, I guess, reading through the language of the agreements. He was very nervous about the landlord could just access his house anytime, and I told him the landlord wouldn't be able to, just come in, all willy-nilly. He'd have to ask permission. I think at least is it 3 times. Is there a certain amount that they have to, in a reasonable amount of time, to ask before entering? Or that's the only problem I guess we had going through the agreement, is the right to access, and him just being very worried about him not being next to his phone and seeing it, and the landlord just coming in. In his case, was like, oh, my wife is in the shower, and the landlord just comes in. He was just very worried about that.
Right. Well, they do have to give reasonable notice, and that should be clearly defined in the lease itself. And so be sure to be looking for those types of things. Whenever you're looking at leases, it should be very specific in the lease. If it's not there, try to get some real clarity from the landlord or the management company about, whenever you're signing the lease.
I mean, the Texas promulgated lease, it basically just says they have to give reasonable notice.
Right.
So
it's very vague. And
if you're a tenant who's really, really paranoid, I would discuss that with your landlord up in advance and give a reason why. Or if you're
right.
like, I have a elderly dog who's blind and bolts, and I just would like to be home in your home, like hopefully the landlord can accommodate. But if you're super, super paranoid about that as the tenant, you should discuss that in advance, because the lease is pretty clear about the landlord just having to give reasonable notice and then gaining access. It's in section 14.
Right.
Did you look for like that special provisions or somewhere that, hey, can we put this, like, please reach out to this number, at least 3 times, or a text before you enter, just in case? Or is that too much in legal language? Or
I mean, I think your tenant, what you should talk about it with the landlord, and then I would write it into the lease, because what the lease says is that before accessing the property, the landlord or anyone authorized by the landlord will attempt to first contact the tenant, but may enter the property at reasonable times without notice to make repairs or to show the property. So additionally, landlord or anyone authorized by the landlord may peacefully enter the property at reasonable times without first attempting to contact tenant, and without notice to survey or review the condition, make emergency repairs, exercise a lien, leave written notices. So, I mean, the tenants don't have a ton of rights to keep the landlord out of their property. So if your tenant is really, really squeamish about that, maybe they're not good renters, or maybe you need to really clarify in writing. But if I were a landlord, I'd be a little bit weirded out by a tenant who is super difficult about that. So it's like, what are you doing in there?
Right, exactly. And I think another problem, Zareen and Angela both can help me speak into this, is when we run into problems when we're trying to show homes and there is a tenant in the property and they are not being cooperative. You will experience this throughout your career. It's, of course, they're going to, if that's really that's the problem's on you at that point, because you're trying to access the property. They won't allow it. So you have to keep kind of going back to the listing, the lease, whoever has the lease listing, and say, hey, they won't, whether it's probably going to be the actual owner, typically. But they do have to, the tenant needs to know that if it goes up for sale, they do need to be able to give reasonable time to show it. And a lot of them just won't, they just refuse. And so it gets very, very hard. And just know that you have to keep, you have to be your client's advocate and keep trying to make it happen. I don't know. Do you guys have anything else to speak into that, or any other advice on that?
No, but you're absolutely right. And usually a lot of times it's just, not in the normal showing condition that you would expect from an owner occupied home, because a lot of times the tenants are not happy. It's being sold.
Yes. I used to do a lot of student college housing, and they won't even get out of bed. They wouldn't even get out of bed for the showing. So it's very, very interesting.
So one thing you can try to do is I always try to have photos that are there from before the tenants lived there as the landlord. And then also you can also try and minimize and say we're going to do an open house, or just say we're going to try to get most of the showings scheduled on Sunday to like accommodate the tenant. And if you try to be reasonable, hopefully they'll try to be reasonable back.
Exactly.
Honestly,
exactly.
I wait until mine are vacant and then just turn them around really quick.
It is very difficult to show when tenants are in the property. It's very, very difficult. So just know that may be a problem that you'll run into, but you just have to be your client's advocate. And like Zareen said, get creative. Maybe, if you're representing the owner, you have an open house. If you're representing the tenant, maybe even suggest, to them like, hey, if this is not reasonable, then give me what it is. But just know that you're going to run into it, and it's just going to have to be a hard conversation, with the people that own the property. I want to make you guys aware that there is a new change in the leasing and property management forms that came out in January 2022. And basically, it just requires the landlord to give notice to prospective residential tenants at or before the execution of the lease of whether or not they are aware that the rental dwelling is located in a 100-year floodplain and whether the rental dwelling has flooded at least once within the previous 5 years. That's a brand new law that's just come into place. I'm kind of surprised that it's just now coming into place. But obviously there were some problems that resulted in having to create this. I think it's a great idea because I think anybody moving into any home should know that. But I don't think that when renters are going into places, I don't think it's really a part of their thought process to think about whether or not it's in a floodplain because they're not buying it, right? But it's probably good to know. And that's also where your rental insurance will come into play. Now, I would have them ask whomever they're getting rental insurance from whether or not it would cover flood damage. I tell them to get clarity on that whenever they're buying their policy. And the policies they're not very expensive. They're actually very affordable, but be sure that they do ask that question. And they need to let their insurance company know if it is located in a floodplain. So that's kind of new, and just be aware of that. And then also leasing and property management, a new law that has been mandated is adds to the writ of possession section of the property code that a landlord is not liable to a tenant for any damages resulting from an officer executing a writ of possession or an eviction suit. And so if there is damage because there had to be an actual possession, taking possession or eviction, then the tenant, the landlord's not liable. That is on the tenant if there's damages. And so the tenant will be charged for those damages. So those are two new things that just came into place January 2022. I'm sure we would never have a tenant that would be in this situation, but just know that who the liability is on if there is ever a problem. Okay. And so I just want to talk a little bit about the forms, and I'm going to send these out, but the forms that could go along with the lease, obviously it's you do need to get a residential buyer tenant rep agreement that applies to both leases and and 1 to 4 family. The residential lease itself, there's also a residential application. There's a residential lease and condition form that is very important for your tenants to fill out. I can't impress upon you enough how much you need to impress upon them, how important it is, and list everything that they can find that is damaged or not quite right, and take pictures. Encourage them to take pictures upon move in, because that way they will have proof that they didn't cause the damage to it. So and then it also has to be turned in typically within 3 days. But there is a time frame in which that form needs to be turned in by the tenant, and make sure that they're very well aware of what that is. Is another thing that can come into place is the agreement between brokers for residential lease. That can also come into place. The pet agreement. If they allow pets, you always have to have the pet agreement addendum that goes along with the lease. There could be a registration agreement between broker owner, a W-9, potential forms. You can amend a lease. Like, for example, you want to remove one tenant and add another or something like that. You can amend the lease that way. You can there's an application for a guarantor. So for example, if it's a younger person that's just starting out, they may need a parent or someone to be a guarantor. There's early termination of residential lease that can be submitted. Again, this would come into play if there was a healthy safety problem. and things of that nature. And so there was a COVID lease payment plan agreement that's no longer in place. Actually, you take that out. And then there's also the buyer temporary lease and the seller temporary lease. Do any of you ever use the seller and the temporary leases and have any questions? Is anything not clear about the temporary leases? They're pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Does anybody have any questions at all?
I have two things. They're pretty straightforward, guys. Just make sure that you're advising your clients, whether they're the seller or the buyer on the temporary lease, that they need to talk to their insurance person to figure out what type of coverage they should get on their stuff. If the seller's staying over and their homeowner insurance goes away, they need like a temporary policy for their personal property. So just advise them to talk to their insurance person. And then Michelle Davis had a question. It looks like she fell off. Oh no, there she is.
Yeah, I'm here. I just don't have my face in view because my hair's wet. But so in this market, it seems like we might be representing the tenants on a more frequent basis. And other than getting a tenant rep agreement signed by your client, how do you go about like getting covered by to get paid by the owner? I mean, do you just say, hey, I'm representing this tenant? Do you register with apartment complexes? What are the logistics of that? And is there ever really pushback on representation for a potential renter?
Good question. Yes, you do need to register. For example, if it's an apartment complex, a condo complex, a management company, you will need to register as the representative of the tenant. And they have forms for that. And a lot of times, you know, what maybe they'll stop by and maybe it's open house or something like that, and they view it. Be sure to encourage your clients, as any other time, it's to let them know that they are being represented by an agent, and just encourage them to do that so that you can fully represent them. And so, you know, there are forms that they can sign. And obviously, if you turn in a lease application, you'll be on that. No, you're not on that. It's a registration that you do with the owners, because in a lease, you're right, that there's no place for you to be on there. And so you need to fill out, I'm trying to think, Zareen, how do you do yours?
So my recommendation, and this is also for buyers, is if you have a buyer or a tenant that's going to go and look at properties on their own, whether it's an apartment complex, or if you have buyers that are going to go and like look at new construction, give them 10 of your business cards so that when they go and meet the leasing agent or the listing, the seller's representative, like in the sales building, they give the business card. Because unfortunately, both a lot of builders and a lot of apartment complexes really don't want to pay us commission. But the fact that the tenant can say, like, I gave you my representative's business card on the first day, is really good evidence that they were involved. You just really have to coach your clients about this. I worked with my cousin for like months, showing them houses like all over Timbuktu. And they did this where they went and like bought a house and didn't mention me. And I was like, oh, cool. So I recommend the stack of business cards and really, really educating your clients that they need to let them know that.
So I get that related to apartment complexes, but what if you are helping somebody find a house to lease, and you know you're in MLS and you're looking at lease houses? We're contacting, in most cases, the owners to say, hey, I'd like to show this house to my client. I mean, they will pay you a commission just based upon you making the introduction, right?
Yeah, it's the same thing as with a sale. So if it's in the MLS, there's a listing agent involved, and they've agreed, you know, to the landlord, you're going to pay me 80% of 1 month's rent, and I'm going to pay the tenant's rep, if they're involved, 40% of 1 month's rent. So yes, you will get paid. There's a
registration.
Yeah, there's an agreement between brokers that will kind of govern how you get paid.
Mm-hmm. And there's a registration agreement between broker owner, which is one of the forms that I'll send to you that can be utilized for that as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys.
Sure. Anybody else have any questions? I know Lisa.
Real quick on question. The big thing is all the, I guess, tenants now, they see on these TikTok trends or Instagram where they want to do a rental from a landlord and then Airbnb it out. I guess to try and make money off of someone's house that they own. I guess, how do you advise your landlord to, I would just say, not to even allow that to happen? Because I feel like that gets kind of, I don't know, iffy on insurance, or if something happens, who do you go after? Because I feel like that's just so many, I guess, such a big trend that people are renting out houses and then Airbnb it out.
Right. Well, that can be restricted by not allowing, a home-based business, and so that it can be restricted that way, because that's what that's considered.
It's also that's a sublease, which is not allowed. Sorry, my
or
dog's
it shouldn't.
that.
Yeah, it'll say in there whether that could be subleased, and that's typically they cannot.
Yeah, I mean, the Texas promulgated lease, it's not even an option for us to edit, is that the tenant may not assign or sublease this without the landlord's written consent. So a tenant that does that is in violation of their lease.
Yeah.
Okay.
But as far as advising an owner to allow it, that's a personal decision, whether or not they want to take on that. But I, like you said, I would really have them look into the insurance implications of that and what that would look like.
Gotcha.
I have a question. This is a small detail, but if the landlord wants to put a lockbox on the house for the last 30 days of the lease, is there some way you can get around that?
Get around not putting one, or?
Yeah, not putting one.
There's a section in the lease. So when you're negotiating the lease, it says that the landlord has the right to put a lockbox on the property. I'm looking for the section right now. For the last X days.
Right.
So what I usually do as the landlord is I put 45 days and then I put a full month's rent. Mm-hmm. So if the tenant really doesn't want a lockbox on the property, then they can pay me a full month's rent. Otherwise, I have the right to. Now I don't, but I'm looking for what section that is in the lease.
14D.
There you go. Thank you. Does that make sense, Betsy? So,
I mean, could you just say, could there be something written that you would allow showings, but you don't want a lockbox?
Yes, the difficult part, if you're representing the owner in the lease, is that, someone would have to be present to open it and things of that nature, right. But yes, it can be done that way. It just has to be very clearly defined in the lease listing.
And there's also a form called key box authorization from tenant. So if you are going to put a key box on the property when a tenant is in place, I recommend using that form. Just for that. That's why I don't show properties that have tenants in them. It's like not worth the fuss. But if you want to, I would get that key box authorization from the tenant.
Well, okay. I wouldn't want one. I mean, it's a matter of the tenant not wanting it.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a good question. Anybody else have any other questions?
This does not sound like a fun process.
It's not that bad once you kind of get used to it. And it does need to be part of your business model. I wouldn't say it a large percent, but I will tell you that's another, it's another type of client that you can turn into great buyers and potential, maybe eventually sellers, because starting out as a tenant, especially in this market, what we're seeing is a lot of younger people coming into the market, newly graduated, things of that nature. They cannot afford a starter home. They just can't get there. So these are great people to represent in their leases and then turn them into buyers. It's becoming a bigger part of what we're doing right now.
The agents that do leases will say like it's relatively quick money, right? If you pick up a tenant and you're like, here's the 6 properties that might fit you, and you go show them and you sign a lease, and hopefully you get paid within a week or two and the work is done. So I mean, I will tell you guys not to turn your nose up at leases. Like Pamela is saying, it's really good advice. We have some mega top producers that started, and all they did their first year was take lease referrals and then converted them into clients. So if you're willing to do the work, it can really pay off.
Well, and just a quick question, as a new agent, how do you either stumble on tenants to represent, or even better yet, how do you find landlords who you can represent to do leases?
Well, it's the same process of, finding listings in general. Yeah. It's just putting it out there, what you're an expert at or what you can do for them, and letting people know. It's just getting that message out, right? One thing I want to impress upon all of you, though, is always remember when you're representing a tenant or you're representing the landlord, have a bigger picture in mind and know that they're probably going to sell it one day, and make such a good impression of how you handled that lease and how professional you did it, that they will think of you whenever they come to sell it. So just know that there's a couple of different opportunities to turn into sales. It's the person you're representing, but it's also the person that owns the home. And so remember that you're also making an impression upon them. And so be thinking about what would be a good way to do some sort of flow to stay in touch with the owners as well. And just think about that, because they're both potential clients.
One other good way to pick up leases is there's a lot of busier agents that don't want to deal with them. So if you become good at it and make yourself available, it's another good way to just offer to take care of them, or take their lease clients off of their hands and just show to the our busy experienced agents that you're a good communicator and take good care of their people.
That's right.
Hi, just a kind of quick question. Do you give the buffer time for the tenant, maybe 24 to 48 hours before the lease starts, and so let them move in, give them some buffer time?
No, they typically, and I'll let Zareen follow this up. Typically, you cannot move in until the lease actually starts.
Okay.
That's right. It's up to the landlord, but generally speaking, the tenant gets access the day the lease starts.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions?
One thing to share, in the process, I'm working multiple leases right now with different clients. One terminated, and now they wish they hadn't terminated, because after looking at 10 different properties and putting deposits down, only to go to see the property, which they hated, they regret not having bought the property, which was interesting. And so now, after all this time, I think I've been working on it for like 6 weeks. I think I'm getting 25% of, I'm getting half of 25% for a 6-month lease. So it's been rather frustrating. And of course, the client's not happy, because they're like, well, we wish we'd have not terminated the contract for the apartment, the one they were buying. And the only reason they were buying that one was because it was expiring and the homeowner wanted to sell. But anyway, that's one thing to share. But I'll say this, I'm working with a different client, and he called me and said, I found this for lease by owner. And we've turned it into working a contract to buy.
Awesome. Awesome. And probably it all came about because you asked the question, hey, you want to sell it?
Well, actually, I'm working with someone recent out of college, and he asked that. He said, would you consider selling? And with that, he did not have I actually know his agent for like 25 years, but he did not have an agreement with him. And he will be using his agent. But what's turned out great about it is that he's visiting with me he's a developer on other properties. So it's not all time lost.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good. I saw that Blake put something to everyone. It says last July and August, buyers were getting buyer fatigue and needed to get their kids in the Frisco district and would pivot to leases. And the leasing market was crazy with 10 to 20 applicants per house. One thing that we're seeing right now, I just had a discussion with my agency the other day in our office, is we're actually seeing not only competitive bids for homes, we're now seeing very competitive bids for leases. People are actually offering more on leases to get them, which is, I have never seen before, very much and I've been doing this a long time. This is the first time I've ever really heard of having to overbid on a lease to try to get it. But just know that may be something you have to do. All right, guys, it is 9:56. I want to finish up on time. I will send out a follow-up email, the things we talked about and the relevant documents that would pertain to a lease. Zareen, I'll let you close this out.
I think that's great. Do you guys have any other questions? Pamela, will you be sending the agreement between brokers, like just to talk about how they get paid, or how does an agent get paid on a lease? Let's walk them through that, since that's why we're doing all this hard work.
Right, exactly. Well, like you said, you have to submit your W-9 for sure. Make sure that you get that from your sales manager, submit that. And then the registration agreement, if it's not, a management company, and if it's not an apartment complex, you will have to do a registration agreement between broker owner to get paid. And so that's a simple form. I'll attach that to the email. And, along with any other relevant documents that you need to be aware of.
Awesome. Okay. Any other questions? Thanks for showing up, guys. Thank you so much, Pamela.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.